The History of SIGMAR HELDENHAMMER. In the imperial calendar IC, which bases its starting date upon the coronation of Sigmar by the Jarl Ulrich, Sigmar is believed to have been born -30 IC in what is now the northern areas of the Reichland, ruled by the Unberogen, one of the most powerful tribes of ancient times, rivaled only by the Teutogens and chaos-worshipping Norsi to their north. His father was the legendary warrior king Bjorn Unberogen, son of Redmane Dragor, who purged the flesh-eating Skriani from the lands of men in an age long gone. The birth of the royal son was a cause for much celebration amongst the Unberogen, and Bjorn ordered great feasting to be held to honor the gods for this blessing. While wise men came from all around the Unberogen holdings to speak of the portents they had witnessed that would affect the child's birth, in the end, however, it was when old Drego, the oldest and wisest of the wise men, had gutted a hare and read its entrails that the truth of the signs became apparent. For it was found that with the coming of childbirth, both mother and son would die. Pale with fear, Bjorn gathered his trusted bodyguard to journey to the domain of the hag-woman of Brackenwalch, an ancient sea-ress who alone had the knowledge to save the family of the Unberogen king. Bjorn and his retinue journeyed to the Brackenwalch, a place no man dared, filled with darkling things, and it was said its winding paths led to the underworlds of the demon gods of the Norsi. At the marsh, the Unberogens abandoned the cart they had placed Bjorn's wife Griselda, for the ground was too treacherous. To the heart of the marsh they journeyed, where the seer was reputed to dwell. They found nothing there, save her shack and cauldron. The hardened warriors started when they noticed clear blue eyes peering at them from the broth, and then they noticed human bones strewn about the abode. The orcs had boiled the crone alive in her own cauldron. From all sides the orcs came, howling and baying, drawn by the scent of Griselda's blood and eager to shed yet more. Bjorn, roaring a terrible battle cry, no less fearsome than the cries of the orcs, launched himself into the fray and fought as only a man defending that which he cherished could, slaying many orcs at a time with great sweeps of his legendary axe, Soul Taker. Eventually, he closed in with the orcish chieftain, a massive, brutal creature towering above all others in the battlefield. Man and orc, fiercest of rivals, now locked in mortal combat until Bjorn smashed the orc to the ground and tore open his throat with his dagger. The battle had been won, but many of Bjorn's royal guard were slain, and it was far too late to save his wife. Bjorn rushed to Griselda's side, only to find her dead from blood loss. Weeping, he nonetheless spied an infant stirring at her feet, wallowing in the mingled blood of human and orc. Sorrowful at the death of his love, yet overjoyed at the birth of his son, the grieving king raised the infant into the air as a mighty peal of thunder cracked the sky, and the great comet lit the night with twin fiery tails. Thus was born Sigmar Unberogen, who had entered the world with the sound of battle in his ears and the feel of orcish blood upon his flesh. The years went on, and Sigmar grew to become a fierce and strong warrior. Before he had reached even the cusp of manhood, he was already a capable and respected fighter, bringing much pride to his father. He forged long-lasting friendship with three fellow tribesmen, Wolfgard Krieger, Pendrak, and Trinovantes. These three warriors would eventually become his sword brothers, and would follow him on his path to unite the tribes. One summer, on the day before his 10th year, Sigmar sparred against Wolfgard. The latter was 3 years older, as well as taller and stronger, and defeated the Unberogen prince. Incensed at his humiliation, Sigmar swung the smelting hammer he used as his weapon when Wolfgard's back was turned, breaking the older boy's arm. At the sight of his friend's agony, Sigmar's rage was swept away and replaced with horror at what he had done. and it was then he was taken by his father and taught an important piece of wisdom. All men feel anger, but to become a great leader, you must master it, the mighty king said. Today, you vented your anger upon one who did not deserve it. Learn to direct your strength for the good of your people, not their ill. With that, Bjorn set Sigmar upon his dooming day, where he would stand amidst the tombs of his fathers and hear their wisdom, that he might learn to forge his future as king. Within those tombs, he offered up a bull's heart in honor of Mor. Behind him, the portal through which he had entered had been sealed by a boulder. Trapped, Sigmar made a prayer to mighty Ulrich and his honored ancestors, offering them all that he was if they would save him, perishing unfulfilled. The future king spied a shaft of light breaking through the dark rock. Exerting his already fearsome strength, young Sigmar nudged the great boulder blocking his escape away. He staggered away from the halls of his ancestors, a thanks to Ulrich on his lips. He reached the summit of the hill and beheld with clarity the lands of his fathers in their full. What he saw made his heart balk. Sigmar beheld the frailty and uncertainty. He saw men huddled together, forever afraid, forever vulnerable. Scattered villages like merciful islands spread out amidst a sea of darkness, and enemies drawing ever closer. He saw the disparate nature of the sons of men, the inherent weakness born of jealousy, distrust, and ambition. He remembered his rage and the crack as Wolfgard's arm broke under his assault, and in that unworthy act he saw the doom of men. With the voices of his honored forefathers whispering in his ears, and the courage of Ulrich swelling in his breast, Sigmar knew what had to be done. Sigmar stepped into his destiny without hesitation. His mission to unite the tribes of men into an everlasting empire, born on the foundations of strength and honor. On that day, the Heldenhammer was born. As the young warrior prince stood ready to brave the perils of his destiny, Sigmar came to vanquish his first true challenge at the cusp of his youth. In the legends of his people and that of his grandfather, King Dragor Redmane, a curse had been laid upon the Unberogans for failing to offer up sacrifices to mighty Tal during an extremely bountiful hunt. In his ire, a great beast known as Black Tusk the Boar had killed Sweyn Oakhart, brother to King Dragor Redmane, who was the one who enacted the first great hunt and now tries to go on one more in hopes of appeasing the anger Tal. He returned barely alive, his stomach stuffed with leaves to stop his innards from falling out. A sacrifice was finally made, and King Redmane buried his dead brother in the burial tomb of their people, their debt to the gods finally paid. The beast is said to still dwell along the banks of the river Skane, and so did Sigmar and his closest companions, the courageous Wulfgard, the skillful Trivonates, and the wise Pendrach went on their journey towards those forbidden banks. Sigmar eased their concerns that they are simply going out to fish, but for the young boy Sigmar, his quarry was the infamous Black Tusk. There, upon the river Skane, the young boy stood upon the river waters, the fish here being so plentiful due to the intimidating presence of old Black Tusk. As the day passed on and the boys laughed and played, a shadow soon loomed over them. Growing as large as a horse, the fearsome boar known as Black Tusk stared angrily at the youths. The boys backed away and soon swam across the river as the boar inched forward, but it was only Sigmar who stood his ground. As Black Tusk charged towards him, head lowered, Sigmar held out his hand and stared Black Tusk directly in the eye. As the beast was upon him, Black Tusk faltered and then stopped when its snout was almost touching Sigmar's hand. Whispering to the beast, Sigmar slowly touched the boar's snout and slowly moved around him towards his bristly neck. With a jerk, Sigmar removed his spear which was lodged into its back, a spear that was probably struck by his great-uncle long ago. With a nod, the beast turned towards the banks and trotted into the trees. Thus did Sigmar's first challenge was not won by bloodshed, but by words and deeds. a characteristic which will mark him for the rest of his history. The years went by, and Sigmar grew yet more fearsome, his vision of a united, prosperous, and mighty future for his people driving him on. In time, he grew to be the greatest warrior of the Unbroken, even before attaining his shield in battle. At the age of 15, Sigmar led a retaliatory raid upon a green-skinned tribe in retribution for their prior attack on an Unbroken holding. The chieftain of these beasts was a mighty Black Orc war boss known as Vagras Headstomper. By chance, the Orcish warband had made prisoners of the then High King of the Dwarfs, Kurgan Ironbeard, as well as his kinsmen, as they were en route to meet with the Stoneheart dwarf clan of the south. The Unborogans cornered the Orcs, unwittingly coming to the rescue of the dwarfs as well. This meeting would be a turning point in man's history. In the battle that transpired, Kurgan Ironbeard bore witness to this young human prince facing down the Black Orc. Despite young Sigmar's mighty strength, every killing blow his bronze sword had made was turned aside by the armor of the Orc, and every blow from its flaming axe came all too close to ending his young life. Ironbeard broke free of his bonds and fought his way to Vagras's tent, where he kept his pick of the Dwarf King's possessions, including the mighty hammer Galmaraz, the splitter of skulls. Kurgan threw the hammer towards Sigmar, cursing the Orcs with every curse known to dwarf kind. Sigmar caught the ancient weapon, and the tide turned from the Unbroken. Sigmar assaulted the Orc with mighty strikes of his hammer, the fury of his blows bringing the hulking beast down to a single knee. With the final strike, Sigmar smashed the Orc's skull to bloody shards, a mighty feat even for a warrior wielding a weapon forged with dwarven skill. With the close of the battle, their holdings avenged, Sigmar attempted to return the hammer to the High King. In that moment, a historical act came about, one unheard of in all the annals of both men and dwarves, and forever forged an unbreakable bond of friendship between the men of the lands west of the mountains and the dwarven kingdom of Karazankor. King Kurgan Ironbeard gifted the ancient hammer Galmaraz to Sigmar. It was a unique happening for a unique weapon, for the power of Galmaraz is old, ancient even to the dwarfs, and it is said of the weapon that it itself possesses a will of its own, and it actively chooses those who are to bear it into battle. Indeed, as fate would have it, the hammer was always Sigmar's, and had been waiting for the day the warrior would claim it. The Dwarven King looked upon Sigmar and saw within him power, honor, courage, and ability without parallel, and knew that Galmaraz was rightfully his. And he also reasoned that an ancient runic weapon was fitting payment for saving the life of a Dwarven king. From then on, the Dwarven nations and the Unbroken clans were the most steadfast of allies. At the start of his 15th year, Sigmar was now charged with earning his shield, an important rite of passage for the men of the ancient tribes, as this symbolized the progression into full manhood. Sigmar would now lead a true army of his fellow tribesmen into battle against the enemies of the Unbroken. For once again, the Orcs of the mountains laid waste to the holdings of men, this time led by a war boss known as Bone Crusher. Sigmar had long stared death in the eye and smiled back at it, but the challenge before him made him fear. For Sigmar now had the lives of his fellow men in his hands, and was in a position to be judged by his fellow warriors. He had led men in battle before, but none of such magnitude as this. His father saw these things and assured him, telling him it was the charge of men to face fear and overcome it, and that the same serpent had gnawed at his belly when Sigmar's grandfather, Redmane Dragor, had sent him out to earn his own shield. Bjorn had also told his son that he knew that his deeds would be legend one day, and that men would speak his name in awed whispers long after his passing. Presenting his son a bronze-studded shield, Bjorn told him to either come back with it or upon it. Offering their blood sacrifices to Ulrich, the Unberogans feasted and caroused, knowing that for many, Tomorrow would be their final day. The Unberogen rode to Astorfen and built a camp near the beleaguered town and sent scouts to learn of the enemy's position. The Orcish army was 2,000 strong in all and was led by a towering Orcish warboss clad in black armor with a massive war axe. Here was Grimgut's Bone Crusher, who with a mighty throw of his weapon towards the Astorfen gate made the signal for the mob to begin the siege. Sigmar and his warriors then rode down the slope of his hill. The warrior prince had cast aside all armor to show his contempt for the orcs. He held a great iron spear in one hand, with a single throw of it impaled 2 orcs. The orcs were caught unprepared by the cavalry charge, and their lines were bent back and made to waver. However, every orc slain had another ready, and eager to take its place, and for all the fury of the Unberogen charge, the orcish line held. Pendrag led a company of horse archers down another slope and met the orcs on their other flank, hammering into them with arrow after arrow. This time, however, the orcs reacted, and their crude shield wall broke to allow their warriors to chase the now retreating horsemen. Eventually, the orcs began to retake their lost ground, and it was now that Sigmar revealed his true plan. With 2 blasts of a war horn as the signal, Sigmar's warriors broke from the battlefield back to the war camp, while another force of Unberogen warriors, serving as the army's rear guard, formed up at Astorfen Bridge and readied their axes to face the onrushing orc hordes. The Unberogans replaced their weapons and took up fresh remounts at the base, and then charged back to the fight without second thought, knowing their time was being bought with the blood of friends and sword brothers. It was the noble Trinovantes who led the rear guard, fighting the orcs as if the spirit of Ulrich filled him on that battlefield. Many orcs did he and his brave warriors slay, until they fell in heaps about them. However, the Unberogans were soon overwhelmed, and Trinovantes was slain in single combat with warboss Bone Crusher. Seeing his long-time ally die to the orc warlord's axe, Sigmar let loose a howl of terrible rage as he closed in with the orc, leaping from his saddle and swinging his hammer in a single, devastating arc that obliterated the orc warlord's skull. With that, Sigmar and his warriors slaughtered the remaining orcs with vicious joy, roaring out brutal supplications to their god Ulrich. On that day, Sigmar had defeated a foe many times his own number, had sent a trusted friend to his death, and filled his heart with burning hatred for the enemies of men. His shield earned, Sigmar and his warriors returned back to Reichdorf in glory. Thus did Sigmar return to the Unberogen capital of Reichdorf, modern-day Altdorf, draped in victory and glory, having broken a massive orc army of 2,000 strong and saved the village of Astorfen from certain destruction. Nevertheless, the death of Trinovantes weighed heavily on Sigmar, and he mourned dearly for his lost friend. After interring the fallen, including brave Trinovantes, into the Warriors' Hill, the great tomb of the Unberogen, King Bjorn ordered a celebration of the victory. Unto this celebration came King Marbad of the Andals, a staunch ally to the Unberogen and sword brother of King Bjorn. In the company of these 2 kings did Sigmar recount the deeds of the heroes of Astorfen and his own vision of an empire. Of him, the Andal remarked, he was at the very least courageous. However, Sigmar's meteoric rise to glory caused him to make enemies within the Unberogen tribe, particularly the swordsman Geryon, twin brother of Trinovantes, who harbored great hatred for Sigmar, for in his mind, leading his brother to his death by ordering him to make that distraction at Astorfen Bridge. Sigmar undertook a purging of the terrible beastmen who dwelt in the expansive forests of the Unberogen lands, making the tribal holdings safe in the name of his father, the king, slaying entire tribes of the beasts single-handed, and avenging their prior depredations on the villages of not only the Unberogans, but also of the other tribes. It was not only beasts and other foul creatures Sigmar overcame, but also the warriors of the other tribes, as Teutogan raiders burned and pillaged northernmost Unberogen holdings, looting villages and stealing cattle. With the aid of the dwarfs, particularly the legendary forge master Alaric the Mad, the Unbrogans produced countless suits of fine iron armor and strong iron swords and axes to arm the Unbrogan warriors. These weapons would later be integral to allowing the Unbrogan to overcome the terror charging down from the far north. Slaughtering their way through Dosi's tribal lands, and then making their way to invade the lands of the Cherusans and Telutans, the mighty Norsi emerged from their frozen kingdom to make all before them a sacrifice to the dark gods. The Cherusans and Telutans put aside their long territorial rivalry to resist the Northmen, but not even the combined strength of two tribes could withstand the unquenchable fury of the Norsi hordes. Not even the fierce Teutigans were willing to raid out against the Norsemen, and the power-hungry Artur elected to lie in wait until after the Norse had annihilated his northern neighbours, desiring to take the lands of the Cherusans and Telutans after the Norse destroyed them for him. As the Teutigans would not dare risk themselves against the Norse, the Cherusans and Telutans were forced to look further south for support. King Aloyses of the Cherusans and King Krugar of the Telutans both sent their respective emissaries Ebrulf and Nocta to the court of King Bjorn, warning him of the peril to the north and beseeching the aid of the mighty Unbrogans. In return, they offered the sword oaths of their respective chieftains, an eternal oath of friendship and unconditional aid to King Bjorn and his heirs if he would deliver them the terror of the Northmen. King Bjorn, after conferring with his advisors, the learned Eoforth and Elfgeir, Marshal of the Reich, agreed to aid the beleaguered tribes, knowing that after they had finished with the Cherusans and Telutans, the Norse would then sweep south unopposed, destroying all in their path, including the Unbrogan. Sigmar was not part of the grand muster that followed, as his father had left him with the charge of protecting the land, while many of the tribe's warriors were marching north. Ever the dutiful son, he worked to defend his father's kingdom, as well as train men to look to their own defense in times of conflict, if he could not be there in time to protect them. Such was the case when Arthur's Teutigans savagely raided the Unbrogan town of Ubersreich. Sigmar swore by Ulrich that when the warriors returned, he would make a terrible reckoning with the northern king. In the north, the combined forces of the Telutans, Cherusans, and Unbrogans fought the Norse. Though the Norse were ferocious warriors of unparalleled strength and skill, their vicious might was countered by the superior numbers and discipline of the southern tribes. Despite this, the cost had been high to drive the Norse back to their frozen kingdom across the seas, and many thousands of southern tribesmen had fallen to their fury. At the final battle against the Norse, the southern tribes fought an uphill battle against the remnants of the Norse army, including King Bjorn himself, who fought the Norse king, a terrible champion of Khorne, clad in red steel and wielding a flaming sword in single combat. Though bloodied and near death, King Bjorn managed to decapitate the Chaos champion with a great swing of his war axe, sending the champion's head and his war banner falling to the ground. The sight drove what remained of the Norse to flung themselves at the battered Bjorn, and soon the Unbrogan king fell into the ground with a dozen sword blows and spears thrust upon his body. Even before he'd learned of the loss of his father, Sigmar was going to feel the loss of his one and only true lover, a beautiful Unbrogan woman named Ravenna. The beloved older sister of both Chinovantes and Geryon, Ravenna was the only woman Sigmar had ever truly loved, and it is said that if things were different, she would have been his wife and be together for the rest of their lives. When the two lovers were alone within the river Reich, Geryon, consumed by grief at the loss of his brother, ambushed the young Unbrogan prince and poisoned him with a slash of his coated sword. As the life slowly drained from Sigmar, Ravenna threw herself at Geryon, but in his blind rage, Geryon stabbed Ravenna, his own sister, by mistake. Seeing her death, Sigmar was consumed by an indomitable rage and rushed towards the grief-stricken Geryon and began to choke the life out of him. Yet the poison still sapped at Sigmar's strength, and as Geryon struggled, a dark power consumed his entire body, and the possessed Geryon threw Sigmar onto the river. As darkness engulfed his mind, Sigmar fell into unconsciousness. Then Sigmar awoke, within a bleak world of ashen grey. The young unbroken prince wandered this grey land for how long Sigmar could not say, until a pack of shadowy humanoids came upon him. With a golden sword in his hand, Sigmar fought valorously against these unnatural foes, yet as the last of the fell creatures let out a howling screech which forced Sigmar to his knees, where he stood helplessly before the creature's own black blade, a double-bladed axe blocked the creature's swing. With one stroke, Bjorn Unbrogen killed the creature and embraced his son in his large arms. Reunited, Bjorn told Sigmar that they needed to go towards a large black gate that loomed in the distance, where they were met by a host of shadowy monsters that were once men. It was then that the true meaning of this journey came to Sigmar. He was near dead, and that they are within the doorsteps to Mor's kingdom. A tall warrior strode out, and Bjorn instantly recognized him as the Norse king he'd slain. The Chaos Champion told him that Sigmar must pass from the world of the living, for the dark gods command his death to be so. However, Bjorn knew that couldn't happen, for he made a solemn vow long ago. The hag woman of Brackenwalch, who was thought to have died when Sigmar was born many years ago, came to Bjorn the day Sigmar returned from the Battle of Astorfen. She told Bjorn that the fate of mankind rested upon Sigmar's shoulder, and that should he live, the race of man will rise to glory and mastery of the land, sea, and sky. Yet should he die, then mankind is doomed to damnation, and the world will end in blood and fire. And so Bjorn stood defiantly against the dark god's wishes, and as he did so, shapes began to appear around him as the ghosts of dead unbroken warriors stood ready to fight one last time for their king. The battle was a close thing, but with the aid of Sigmar, now wielding his golden hammer Galmeraz, the battle was never in doubt. As the darkness dissipated, the Unbrogen stood before the whirling darkness of Mor's gate. One by one, the Unbrogen ghosts passed to the afterlife, but Bjorn waited for a moment longer to give his son a pendant that he wore, giving him his last parting words. Soon, Bjorn's form grew faint, becoming like the ghostly Unbrogen warriors as well. Soon, Sigmar was the only one left behind, and once all of the ghosts had passed, the portal dissipated. Sigmar took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and he awoke in the lands of the living, agony rippling across his near-dead body. With the death of his father, Sigmar ascended to leadership of the Unbrogen. No sooner than his father had been laid in the warrior's hill, that the grieving son had sworn to slaughter his father's enemies. In time, Sigmar marched north with a massive army, calling upon the sworn oaths of King Krugar and King Aloysius, and thus adding their own musters to his own. He had also endeavoured to bring the Teutogens into this final push against the Norse, but King Artur remained withdrawn from such foreign affairs. Indeed, Teutogen raiders even waylaid Sigmar's army as they passed through the land of the Faustschlag. In the north, Sigmar lifted the Norse siege of the Adosi's capital and gained the support of King Volfilla of the Adoses, who eagerly lent his own armies to aid in finally putting an end to the depredations of the raiders who daily ravaged his people. Against the untold numbers of Sigmar's army, not even the ferocity of the Norse could prevail, and they were decisively defeated and driven towards the northern coastline. There, as the remains of the Norse people clambered upon their wolf ships with their women and children, Sigmar swore to all the gods that he would ensure that none of them would survive. With the aid of the Unbrogen and Udosi's archers and the battery of catapults, Sigmar ordered flaming arrows to be shot at the fleeing masses. Thousands of bodies of men, women and children filled the sandy coast of the north, with many more bodies filling the waters and staining it red with blood. While the other tribes became awestruck at the carnage of an entire people, the Udosis were heard to be howling with joy and satisfaction. Large boneyards of wolf ships were scattered all along the coast, and it seemed that not a single Norse survived the massacre. With this act, Sigmar had casually enacted the near-total extinction of an entire tribal race. But Sigmar knew that these men deserved no amount of pity or remorse, for their kind sought to only inflict suffering and misery in service of their cruel and uncaring gods. The Norse had no place within his dreams of an empire, and the blood payment that their earlier invasions had inflicted upon the tribes of the south had been paid tenfold. Yet despite everything he had done, a small scattered band of wolf ships escaped the carnage, and made landfall upon the frozen shores of Norska. From there, they huddled inside the husk of their ships, weathering the horrific blizzards, and gathered strength, hoping to one day return down south and enact their vengeance upon Sigmar's people and begin the vicious cycle of misery once again. With the threat of the Norse addressed for a time, Sigmar turned his attentions towards his dream of an empire. Through a string of heroic battles and tense negotiations, Sigmar succeeded in bringing the tribes under his rule. Having already gained the loyalty of the Teruzen, Telutan, and Udosis through their loyalty to his father, Sigmar sought to encompass his bonds of brotherhood through all the tribes within the lands. Such alliances would provide the base for how he would bring the tribes together, as the heroism of Bjorn had won the respect of nearly all who dwelt in the Reich Basin. Sigmar made no attempt to bring the Ropsmen into the empire, however, as they were so far north and east that they were, for all intents and purposes, the people of a different land altogether. Another limitation of Sigmar's influence was that it did not stretch far enough to bring the Ungol horse tribes into the empire, but the tribes of the Reich continued to maintain passable enough relations with them. The tribes of the Reich who continued to outright refuse Sigmar's call for unity were destroyed outright, such as the now extinct and almost forgotten Fryking's tribe. Now, Sigmar sought to encompass the greatest of the barbarian kingdoms, the fierce Teutogans, the wild Asseborns, the berserk Thuringians, and the fast Burgundians. Sigmar surrounded the Faustschlag with a great army, and called upon Arthur to account for the slaughter of Ubersreich. Down from the great spire rode Mercer, warrior eternal of the Ulrichsburg, and trusted second of the Teutogan kings. It sat ill with Mercer that his king did not come forth himself to cast out the Unbrogans, and Sigmar, ever a capable judge of men, sensed this. Mercer declared that any army that dared assault the fastness of the Teutogans would shatter upon its towering walls. Sigmar, in turn, declared that if Arthur failed to descend from his rock in a single day and explain himself, then he would scale the stone walls of the Faustschlag and break open his skull in full view of his people.